so much of your work is improvisation, but if you could tell me specifically, if you'd like, we could pick a painting off the wall and you could tell me how it started, the first color, the moves through it. I think I'm right in suggesting these are all pretty fresh paintings. But if not specific, then in general, if you could tell me where a painting starts, from the surface on up, if there's a drawing component, take it wherever and which way you want.
When you say fresh, what do you mean?
From this year?
Yes.
Yeah.
Recent.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Well, the analogy I always think of when I think of abstract painting is that it's a musical analogy, basically, that abstract painting is like instrumental music and pictorial painting is like music with lyrics. And instrumental music that interests me most is improvised instrumental music.
Okay.
And that could be in a jazz context, free jazz, or even going back to, Monk and, Coltrane, Parker, those players.
Uh-huh.
And even aleatory music that's more, I guess you would call, I was going to say serious, but it's all very serious, but contemporary classical is one category people use. But that, to me, that kind of image making, it seems so appropriate to our time, and the state of flux that we live in, the state of uncertainty, and surprise. And I really believe that my goal in making my images is to find surprise. And I often tell my students that if you don't surprise yourself, you're not going to surprise the viewer. So this is a roundabout way of answering your question. I'm really committed to full improvisation in the work, starting out not knowing anything about where it's going to go. So I often start with a simple configuration. I might put 2 or 3 colors down on the palette and intermix them to create kind of cogent color relationships to get me started.
Okay.
But as soon as I put a shape down, you have this thing speaking to you. Paul Klee had this great phrase, said, listen to the voice within the painting as it develops. And that's really my mantra in terms of painting, is I start something that could feel relatively arbitrary, a very vague configuration, and then I respond to it, and then I respond to that, and then I respond to that. So each response leads to another response toward ultimately a sense of resolution, which can occur way down the line. These paintings, which are mostly, I would say, small to medium scale, the quickest I could make one of these would be in something like 4 painting sessions, like 4 4-hour painting sessions.
Okay.
But often I have one here called Tangent, which I literally spend 100 hours on. And the challenge there is to continue to improvise without having the image ossify and get kind of hidebound. And that's the struggle. The process, it's very interesting the way this improvisational process works, because it's definitely hills and valleys. Like I'll make adjustments, things seem to be coming into view and more authoritative, and then I'll keep working, and then it starts to drop away, and I start to lose authority, and things start to get murky. And then I keep working, I can bring it up to another hill. The wisest place to stop is at the top of some hill, but you can never trust the first hill, right?
Yeah, I know.
So, and then sometimes I get so deep, like that painting Tangent, I lost that painting so many times, I don't like to give up on a painting.
You don't?
I almost never do that. I usually push through. But the big challenge is to have the finished painting look like it didn't happen in 100 hours.
Of course.
Like to use the word fresh. That's the way I would use the word fresh.
Interesting.
I want it to look like the result of direct thought and not a labored exercise in the application of paint.
Yeah, I understand. That's fascinating. Wait, just tell me, point to, it's that one.
Yeah.
All right. As an audio podcast, we'll have an image of that so people can see if they agree if it's fresh or not. Okay, so improvisation, we've talked a bit about speed in that 4-hour painting sessions is kind of the average for you. But when you're physically making these paintings, is it one move at a time and then the sit back in your chair and evaluate, or is it more the spontaneous, grab this color, paint this, do this, sort of more of an accretion method? Does that make sense?
It's more the former.
Okay.
I'm a very slow painter. And I work on more than one painting at once.
That was my next question. Okay.
So I'll usually have 3 paintings going, typically when I'm working in oil. When I'm working, I also make collages, and they're smaller, and I can get like 8 or 10 of those going at once. But I like that also, the idea of having more than one piece going, because it keeps me from getting too precious and maybe going too quickly to a solution.
Okay.
Again, I've been a teacher all my life, so a lot of my stories have to do with things I tell my students, which I also tell myself.
Sure.
But I often tell my students that an artist has 2 relationships with their work. One is when they're down on the field making the piece, and they have some intention, but as soon as they pick the brush up, there's a negotiation with materiality, with physical reality, difficulty of realization, and the tug-of-war between what you intend to do and what's actually starting to happen on the canvas. And then when you sit in your chair and you look at your work, you put on your critic's cap. And that's when you can be productively analytical. And to me, that really is the result of noticing. Notice what you have, even to the point of describing to yourself what you have. Like, none of the shapes touch the edge of the canvas, that sort of thing. Because there's not things you're necessarily going to notice when you're making.
Yeah.
There's a different kind of noticing. When you pick up the brush and you paint a shape that you have in your mind to kind of take its place with the other shapes that are on the canvas, I try to be very mindful of the thing I'm painting. So, for example, I may have the idea of an ellipse, a sort of freely painted ellipse to go down on the canvas, and I put it down. And as soon as I start making that ellipse, I try to be mindful of the stages of becoming of that shape, because often on the way to the ellipse, I find a shape that's more interesting than the ellipse would have been.
Yeah.
And that's why I think slow painting is the way I like to work, because I want to be really aware of how things are being realized in the process of realization. Because surprise. I'm looking for surprise. It's not surprising to imagine an ellipse and paint an ellipse. What's surprising is, on the way to the ellipse, you find something that's more interesting.
Yeah. I completely relate to it. I would argue maybe that when you're without the sitting back in the chair, that those sorts of, when you rush in like a bull to a painting, you do make those not just adjustments but realizations in real time. So that ellipse, you put that in and, this is a more interesting shape and this and that, which is a little bit more how I paint these days, which leads me to my next question. Are you a fast drying painter? Because often, I can't quite tell from how these paintings read in real life, but often my frenzy of paint leads to a certain, like a muddiness that can take effect, or more importantly, a sort of flatness that finishes a painting that disallows all of that muddiness. So it's the way that I work with wet on wet paint sort of projects what the future painting will look like. And I'm wondering for you, is the reason why 4 sittings is your preference is do you allow for drying time between them? And is that sort of, you must be very materially conscious after this many years painting, but how do you, and as a side question to that, of course, your color is integral. So I'm sure you don't mess around when it comes to a color that you've selected and the sort of muddy way that a spontaneous wet on wet painting can occur.
Well, one thing about my work is not really gestural. It comes more out of a shape making tradition that, more early modernist in a way, although it was vestiges of Gorky and, I guess later we'll talk about influences and things, but there's so many ways to make an abstract painting, many ways to make any kind of painting, but even within abstraction. And I always feel that what you have to find is something that matches your temperament authentically. And that way you don't have to think about it. You're just working reliably out of your temperament. It sounds like even your description of the way you paint is faster than mine, and there is that way of like just throw a lot up there and then sit down and subtract or adjust. That's a perfectly reasonable way to work. I just work a lot slower. And the thing about drawing, I don't aim for 4-hour sessions. I just start a painting and ride it till it's resolved.
Got it.
But I work in oil, and oil is slower drying. What you're talking about is a way of working where, let's say you have a red, yellow, blue on the canvas, on the palette, and white, and maybe raw umber. All right, and then you start throwing those colors up there, and you drag the paint, and that will generate a cogent light, because you're actually creating subtones that are all compatible or all share the same DNA as your original palette. So that coloristically ensures that the colors are going to be homogeneous. If you want to create dissonance, you have to go out of your way to do that. I work differently, but that's a perfectly great way to work because I mix mostly I mix my color on the palette. Although I do, when I'm working the painting, sometimes I'll interfere with the painting. Like I'll take a blade and just go across the surface and drag color into color to kind of create accidents that stimulate surprise. So that's definitely part of my process. But because it's not gestural, because I'm thinking about shape from the get-go, I tend to go from solid shape conceptions into accidents of paint application rather than the other way around.
Okay, I understand.
Well, this sounds like a boring conversation.
No, listen, hey, probably for some out there, but I'm fascinated.
My God, turn it off, right? Okay.
Let me ask you then about shape. I did something a year or so ago because I was tired of the common shapes that I would come up with, okay? So I started working predominantly from my imagination, and I think many of us, we have the colors that we like and the shapes that we like, and if not examined, those can infiltrate all the paintings we make. So I did this little project for myself, which was I think it came from the collages I was making, the offcuts and the way that, one of the things that drew me to collage, and I don't know if you feel the same way, is you can find with the cutting motion shapes that you wouldn't have found otherwise. And so what I did, the project was that I basically just started filling pages of paper with unusual shapes and hanging them around the new paintings that I was making, because maybe when I think of the ellipse, instead of just going for it, I would say, God, I paint the ellipse a lot. What about this weird 4-sided, 5-sided shape with the curve? What about you? How do you expand your shape vocabulary? And I'll add this little observation I had earlier this morning, is that it seems there are recognizable shapes for me in some of your paintings, whether it's it becomes a vase or it becomes a banister of a gate or a fence. I see things in there, and I wonder if you do too. And I know you don't draw, but I could almost believe that a practice of yours will be walking down the street, see an interesting fence, and draw that little shape, maybe just in your mind, and then it comes into a painting. And if I'm wrong, how do you feel like you keep shapes challenging and original when you paint?
Well, my work is very flat. What I don't do ever in my work is model.
Yeah.
I don't model a form or show any kind of illustration of light striking. The only way you can get that is if you have in my painting, is two flat planes that bend. So it creates momentarily a sense of a light struck volume.
Yeah.
But that's like quilt making. It's like baby block prints.
Oh, interesting.
Baby block quilts.
I hear you.
To me, that's germane to flatness. It's not really an illustration of space. So there are really only three kinds of flat shapes, categorically. And it's curvilinear, angular shapes, in which all the sides are angular, flat. Curvilinear, where all the sides are curved, or compound shapes, which combine flat shapes or straight shapes with curved shapes.
Okay.
Curved contours. We're talking about contours. So the ellipse is a curved shape. If you cut this ellipse, cut a slice of it off, then you have a compound shape. All right?
Right.
So in general, there are infinite, it's a sliding scale between, once you get into compound shapes, then, there's just infinite variations possible. Infinite. So the other more general thing, you're talking about shapes in the world. I tend to be attracted to shapes that are either nature-based, or if they're manufactured-based, they have to do with aquadynamics or aerodynamics, like the keels of boats, or plane wings, propellers, things like that.
Great shapes, for sure.
They're great shapes, and I think they're interesting shapes because their form is conceived dynamically in relation to a moving force, wind or water. Right? So I know I tend to be attracted to those kinds of shapes. And then in nature, of course, leaf shapes, ginkgo leaves, and then sometimes things like stains on a wall. Those are also dynamic, right? Shapes that are formed out of some energy, rather than like crisply tooled industrial shapes. They interest me less. I like the kind of a contour that's like, I don't use rulers. I always paint things freehand, because even very straight lines I paint freehand because I want there to be the tremble. I want there to be the lived edge.
I love a tremble too.
It just energizes the painting. And if I paint an ellipse or a circle, I usually have at least a hint of a faceted edge to marry it to the edge of the rectangle. Like, I'm always thinking about the relationship of the shapes to each other and the shape to the rectangle. So, having said everything I've said so far, I think you can surmise that I would be called a formalist, which is a terrible thing to be called nowadays. It used to be the worst thing you could be called would be an illustrator. Now it's a formalist. But I fundamentally believe in the concept of Clive Bell was an early 20th century theorist who came up with this theory called significant form. He was a theorist who wrote about early modernism, and particularly abstraction, and not totally non-objective painting, but he was talking about it mostly in reference to abstract art that's derived from observation, like early Mondrian. Not late Mondrian. Right. But anyway, his premise was that the most enduring art historically was art that, regardless of what it represented, had a kind of a formal subtext, fundamentally geometric, but also had to do with the character of edges and painterly matters. That the most enduring art had this resonant subtext, this formal subtext, and that transcends all art and all history. So I was in Florence very recently because I taught a class over there, and looking at a lot of Madonnas. And it is a fact that the ones that haven't been singled out actually historically, those by Giotto and painters well known, Fra Angelica, those paintings have an insistence, a kind of excellent abstract subtext that isn't in many of the others. I really subscribe to that. I really believe that in work that really endures, and I don't mean historically necessarily, but I mean in terms of long looking, is work that marries whatever its pictorial intent to a kind of formal intent.
Yeah.
So I am, mea culpa, I am a formalist. I believe in that. But I don't believe that it can only be about form. That kind of painting can be very cold and uninteresting.
Yeah.
I think there has to be a sense of humanity, now more than ever, right?
Yeah.
And that comes through touch and through the commitment to the materiality of the painting. So a really important part of painting is the fact that it's dualistic. It's both an image and an object. The surface of a painting for me is its nervous system. So however little paint you're putting on, I still want to see a sense of consciousness about the variations in surface.
And when you're talking about the surface, you are talking about not the substrate behind the paint. You're talking about how the paint sits on it.
The paint film itself.
The paint film itself, yeah.
Yeah. So the direction of the brushstroke, if there are brushstrokes, if there are no brushstrokes, like say in a Morris Louis or a Frankenthaler, the character of the edge, that's where you bring life and kind of specificity to the experience. And going back to a musical analogy, let's take a sax solo by Coltrane. You even hear the mechanics of the pressing of the keys, right? You hear when his wind varies, when he trails off on a note, or when he blows it strong and cuts it off abruptly. All those nuances of acoustical presence are the shaping things that he does to a melody. Those are the things that give it resonance and interest and duration. And endurance, right? And that's very much like, to me, an abstract painting.
Yeah. Well, and I think I see why you brought that up, because my question was about the shape and the form, but the way I phrased it, which makes sense because of the way I paint, sometimes I do think about those forms as stickers on the canvas. You take the form and you put it there. And what you're saying is, it seems like as a formalist, the manner in which that form is painted is nearly as important as the form itself.
As important. I mean, in fact, it's inseparable.
Right.
There's ways of making, graphic design, for example, which I love great graphic design. I'm a big fan. But the goal of graphic design is to be immediately comprehensible, right? Because you're communicating. It's a visual language. And graphic designers have embraced the language of modern art and postmodern art to tell a succinct story efficiently. Painting is just the opposite. A painting, in order to be alive, really has to unfold gradually over time.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting to me, the relation of time to painting as opposed to the relation of time to music. Because music is a sequential art form and has to be perceived in sequence. It can't be perceived any other way. Whereas painting, it seems like painting is simultaneous, that you stand in front of a painting and you get it all at once. But in fact, painting also unfolds in time. And it's not that thing where your eye is being led around the canvas. I never believe that. I think that people don't look at painting that way, but they can never see a whole painting simultaneously. Unless it's something like, even a Barnett Newman would defy that, because there's complexity in Newman that isn't revealed at first glance. But, I've been looking at, Matisse since I was like 19, 18. I really discovered Matisse when I was 18 years old. And that's pretty simple, flat painting, a lot of it, and even Matisse's cutouts, even more so. But I've been looking at him since I was 19, and I still see things I never saw.
Yeah.
Because they unfold. There's something about the character, the negotiable character of the forms that are constantly in flux. There's certitude, but there's also ambiguity. There's all that complexity in simplicity. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm really interested in. And the only way to do that is to not just paint shapes, but also to think about the way the paint is applied, to be, I don't mean think about, think's the wrong word. I would say be sensitive to. Mm. Sensitive to the very specific character of an edge, the character of a shape, the thickness of the paint. Is the brushstroke evident? Because light, when it cascades across a painted surface, creates surface shadow. Mm-hmm. So you're doubling the color right there with surface shadow. All that stuff is drinking deeply of the phenomena of what a painting is. And I think the better you get as a painter, the more mindful you are. I hate using that word mindful, by the way. It sounds like I'm a Buddhist or something, which I'm not, unfortunately. Uh-huh. I don't think I have the spiritual depth, but I do think there's a level of awareness that heightened awareness produces better painting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about, you had just mentioned that that idea of reading a painting all at once versus reading it longer, these two suppositions about how we look at a painting. But I think what we left out there is scale. And I wanted to ask you about the scale of your work. I do believe that, sure, when it's massive, there's an immersive quality to a painting where you are physically going to explore it, even if you can stand back and read it all at once. What about the scale that most of these works in this gallery hold to keeps you interested? And have you worked, I've seen smaller works of yours, do you work bigger? And what are the conditions or the problems, the challenges of a large painting?
Well, when I was in grad school, I made 8 by 10 foot abstractions.
Okay.
I mean, that was the way I was working then, being young. And having a much bigger studio than I have now. Sure. The way I think about it is this. Generally speaking, I've noticed that people tend to stand about twice the diagonal of a painting away from a painting when they look at it. Okay. So if you're looking at a 6 by 6 foot painting, the average person is going to stand about 8 feet away from that painting. And I see it all the time in galleries. You can actually observe this. If a painting is 20 by 20 inches, which is about maybe a 24-inch diagonal, they're going to stand about 2 feet away from it. What's interesting about that is, with a smaller work, the viewer will naturally stand at the same distance I was when I made it.
Interesting.
With a large piece, it's this thing about standing back and taking in the whole image. If they want to read the surface, they have to go in. Yeah. They have to walk, basically. Mm-hmm. And one is not preferable to the other, and they both have huge advantages of their own. But I also, as the way art has developed in the late 20th century to become more and more spectacle and more of a communal activity, like you go to the new modern and you just sound leaking from one gallery to the next, and things are massive and people are standing in groups. It's not the way I think about painting. I think about painting more like the experience of a poem, or as a very intimate, private kind of personal experience, which now some people would say, well, that's elitist, which to me is ridiculous. I mean, we live lives as in groups, and we live our life privately as individuals. All of that's part of life. I'm personally very interested in the one-on-one relationship, and therefore I like to make smaller paintings because I want people to be where I was when I made it.
Yeah.
I want them to be able to read the image and the object simultaneously. Right? The other thing about abstraction, this is a little bit of a sidetrack from answering that question, but I consider what I do as factual painting, as opposed to imagistic painting, which I call fictional painting. I mean, that's kind of a polarity. And of course, I love imagistic painting. I'm a huge fan of all kinds of painting.
Yeah.
But by factual painting, I mean, paint is a fact, the flatness of the canvas is a fact, the way I apply it, all the specifics of the paint application are factual. Whatever else is happening in my paintings, like there's spatial dominance or hierarchy, there's a hierarchy of importance within the forms, but I never deviate from the factual. It's a fiction to paint a sphere with light striking it.
Of course.
Right? And of course, anything else you're representing that's not literally there, you're bringing in fictionally.
Right.
So that factuality is again sort of heightened by intimacy. Right? So, I mean, the greatest form of fiction in our time are movies. Huge and really engrossing, but it's all fiction all the time. I like I like the experience of factuality as presented in an intimate setting. And that's why I'm very drawn to pre-Renaissance art and also Eastern art that tends to accept the factuality of the flatness. So even though Japanese woodcuts and Indian miniatures, well, particularly Japanese woodcuts, are pictorial and have a lot of fiction in them, they never deviate from the statement of flat fact. And this is not coming out of a sort of Greenbergian kind of Puritanism. Like, I don't agree with Greenberg. I think he took it too far, and he dismissed too much, and he believed in a historical narrative, a progressive historical narrative, which to me seems now ridiculous. However, I do think he understood what was essential to painting as fact, and the kind of phenomenological basis for painting, and I accept that aspect of it. But I think, he worked himself into a corner, really. I mean, his argument ended up at Ad Reinhardt, which I love Ad Reinhardt, but he's just one of many painters making paintings his way, and powerful and still resonant. But you can't say that's the end of painting.
Right.
You can't there's still, Alice Neal was painting at the same time. Her paintings were just as much about being alive in the 20th century as his was.
Yeah.
Right?
Of course. That word intimacy brought a question to mind. How do you feel about seeing 12, 15 of your paintings in a gallery space? I know you work on them together, not one at a time. And it's very interesting to hear what you said about scale and how people have to get close. But is there anything about these works then that is antithetical to being in a group in a gallery and maybe lacking a little bit of that intimate space? Would you agree that it's lacking, or
what would be a more intimate space?
I think my question comes from seeing them as a group. And granted, of course, you can have an intimate moment here and move to the next one and have an intimate moment there. But something about that makes me want to give them really one-on-one time.
Well, When I was in Florence, I visited San Marco, and if you go upstairs in San Marco, there are where the monks stayed. Have you been there actually?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, something to look forward to.
All right.
There are these little chambers, and there's probably around 20 of them. And each one of them has a separate fresco by Fra Angelico. It's unbelievable. I mean, it's the greatest motel art in the world. You want to think about it that way. I mean, you go in there, and and the most famous of his frescoes are in these little chambers.
Sure.
And there's one in each one, not more than one, what you're talking about. There's something about seeing them in the real, in those spaces, that really heightens the experience and brings that sort of deep psychological, deep. I would use the word spiritual. Some people hate that word, but there's something. It touches something very elemental in you. I think because it's a combination of the painting and the setting.
Sure.
This is what you're talking about.
Right.
So if I could have each one of these paintings in a monk's cell, it wouldn't be anywhere near as good as Fra Angelico, anywhere near, but it would be a way of isolating the work to its advantage.
To its advantage. And I think that's at the core of my question is, do you think your paintings power each other when curated like this, or are they sort of singles off of an album?
There's
not that you have to pick one necessarily.
Yeah. Well, it's always nice to see your work on a clean wall, well lit.
Yeah.
And the studio is not the place, because this cleanliness is not available in my studio. As most studios, you just have a lot of stuff stacked up.
I've seen a couple clean ones in my day, and I was wondering that about you, is if we were upstate now instead, how messy I would find it.
If it was a sliding scale and you had Mondrian on one side, who was antiseptic, and you had Francis Bacon or Lucian Freud on the other,
sure,
I'm probably dead in the middle.
Dead in the middle.
Right.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, the curation thing, Joseph Kosuth, he put on a show of erotic art in Manhattan probably 20 years ago. And I remember reading in the Times an interview with him, and the interviewer kept asking him about specific paintings. And finally, in exasperation, he said, "The paintings are merely words. I made the sentences." So he was taking a lot of credit as a curator for, I guess you'd say, the meaning of the exhibition.
Yeah.
I think you have to kind of give that to the curator. JJ curated this, and he chose the work, and he hung it. And I'm very pleased with what he did.
Right.
I don't mind that they interact, but I do think of my work, even though I work on 3 or 4 at once, I do think of them as quite solitary. I imagine them as it would be in the house of a collector. One nice thing about working small is that my work is available to people who are sort of in my income bracket. And by that, I don't just mean, paychecks. I'm talking about the kind of space I live in.
Yeah.
I don't have massive walls. My ideal collector is someone who buys a piece of mine because they love it and they want to live with it, and it unfolds over time.
Interesting. It's the second time you've mentioned a type, not control in a pejorative sense, but this idea that the scale of your paintings allows for your audience to be just where you are when you're painting them. And now the idea that they'd go into a home on walls that are kind of like yours as well. There's no question there, but I just find it charming because so much of the education artists get is once it leaves your studio, it's hands off, and that's when control ends. But I like that you have at least an ideal of what happens next.
Well, it's no real control. It's like imagined fantasy control.
Sure.
I mean, one reason I frame my work is to keep collectors from framing it.
Interesting. I think I rarely talk about frames because I feel like there was a joke in undergrad where we'll all just sit around critiquing the frame if someone decides to frame something.
Right.
But I didn't pick up on that. So another element of control for you is the frame.
Yeah. It's, I mean, I love raw edges.
Me too.
You know, that would be the coolest thing.
Okay.
And it's certainly au courant. I mean, of course, that's something, again, that goes in and out of fashion.
Yeah, that's true. But when these paintings are hanging in your home, no frames then?
That's right.
Huh.
Mostly true, actually.
Interesting.
But, like, for example, I think a Rembrandt would look better with no frame. You know, I love when I go to in the back, if you go in the back room of a museum, you see these old paintings without the frames.
Such a good point. Yeah.
The physicality of the edge and all that stuff. I love that. That's ideal.
Yeah.
But when you're in a commercial space like this and people are going to walk home with a painting, you cannot control what they're going to put on it. And I just would rather have a simple white frame that at least I know isn't god awful. You know, it doesn't hurt the work.
The lesser of two evils approach.
The lesser of two evils. The other thing about it is sometimes you don't always get to have your work on a white wall. You can be in a show on a brick wall.
Yeah.
And I like the white frame to separate the painting from the wall.
Makes sense.
In that context. And thirdly, it does protect the edge of the painting. So there are three good reasons to have a frame and one good reason not to, basically.
Can we switch focus to your collage and mixed media work? Because a question I had earlier in our conversation was that it sounds like you work on paintings some days versus collage, well, meaning you don't go from mixed media to painting back and forth, maybe in the same session, which stands to reason. But I'd like you to talk a little bit about maybe where and when that process began, your interest in collage. I'd like you to talk about the challenges and the excitement in a mixed media piece and how those are different from paintings, why you continue working on both. And I'll pepper in more questions as we go.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Yep.
That's, first of all, I make paintings for a while, and then I might take 2 months off and make mixed media pieces.
Okay.
I never do them in the same time period.
Okay.
The two processes, even though they're both improvisational and they're both fundamentally non-objective or abstract, painting is what's historically referred to as a plastic medium. So, which basically means that all the edges are negotiable, right? Whereas collage is a constructed medium, wherein none of the edges are negotiable, right?
Right.
So you can create the illusion of negotiability by creating like a staggered gradated edge or something visually, but it's more like a graphic attack and not really a plastic attack.
You're right.
So the other thing about collage is that it's very flexible because before you actually glue something down, you could push it around a million different places. Painting doesn't give you that kind of flexibility.
Right.
However, both have the advantage of being almost infinitely redoable. Right? Painting, you can sand down and paint over a passage. You can retrieve it. In collage, you simply cover it with another piece of paper.
Right.
So collage is a faster medium. I can usually make a collage in about a 6-hour session. And I also work longer sessions with collage, which is kind of interesting because the painting is a slower process. But I seldom paint more than 4 hours. I often do 4-hour morning and then 4-hour afternoon sessions in painting with a break in the middle. In collage, I'll work for like 8 hours on a piece. I will break for lunch or something, but I just stay with it. Or get it to, actually what I do in collage is I'll get several of them to a place where they're almost resolved, but not fully resolved. And then I put them together and then I sort of bring them down and work on them and put them back up. So in a way, it's kind of a two-step thing.
And by that, I think that was a question I had. You do work on them on the wall as well as flat. Is that what you're saying?
No, they're constructed flat.
They're constructed flat.
But then I put them on the wall to study them.
Got it. Then will you work on them more? Meaning,
Yeah.
Okay. So you study them. Obviously, it's all sealed at that. Yeah. Now I understand. Continue.
Actually, refining my answer a little bit, thinking back, because I haven't made collages for a little while.
Okay.
I'm about to do a big collage session or mixed media session. I try to get the piece 2/3 of the way through, whatever that means. So there's not a lot of, not fully resolved, definitely not fully resolved, but well on its way to becoming what it is.
Uh-huh.
Its identity is established. Then I'll put that on the wall, and then I'll bring another one down, and I'll start that. And sometimes I can get there in 4 hours, sometimes I get there in 6 hours, and then I'll start another one. So I'll have like 5 or 6, or maybe as many as 10 on the wall in that state of becoming.
Interesting.
And then I bring a second round. I go back and I kind of bring them to a finish. So I bring them up all. One reason I do that is because I like to create a kind of interrelationship between the collages in a way that I don't really do in the paintings. The paintings are, even though I may work 3 at once, I don't really think of them in relation to each other.
And when you're working on 3 at once, when it comes to the paintings, will you switch between paintings on the same day? Will you do 4 hours? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that was just a side question.
Definitely. But the paintings, I like to think that the paintings are highly individual, that they have the same DNA, but it's more like a family. So a brother and a sister could have the same DNA, but be very different personalities.
Right.
You know.
Whereas a series of collages, they kind of, there's a, what's a word for it? Homogeneity to it, or something.
Like an overarching,
yeah.
Gathering thing. Yeah, I would say it's true in the collages. And like this collage that I'm showing here, I started introducing torn paper, which I hadn't done. My earlier collages, if you go on my website, you'll see earlier ones that are they're probably more elegant. Yeah. They're a little more graphic. They're simpler in a way, more open feeling, and they have no torn edge. And the reason I went toward the torn edge is I wanted them to be a little more painterly feeling.
Got it.
And pulpier. And that's where this body of work went. I think the ones I'm about to start, I'm going to keep going in that direction, probably. But I'm thinking of shifting the color a little bit. The other thing about these is they tend to be a little earthier, coloristically than the previous ones.
Got it. Can I ask for you to just break down the material components of this body of mixed media works, meaning the types of paper you're using, the substrate, the glues or adhesives? I mean, this is something that you must have, you're pretty dialed in at this point. And I'm just wondering, because there's so much to know, and archivability is a question, even if it's not the most interesting question, but how do you, tell me about the material.
I'm very concerned with technical integrity or physical integrity. I used to teach courses in materials, actually, and I've always been concerned with that in my painting and mixed media things. So the mixed media pieces, the earlier ones actually were done on 100% cotton marker paper, which is a very thin, really strong paper. And I would paint paper with acrylic gouache.
Okay.
That's the kind of paint I use when I do these pieces. It's an acrylic paint that dries to a very, almost like a suede finish, like gouache. It looks like gouache, actually, but it's not reworkable like gouache.
Okay, so if you get it wet, it's not going to pull up.
Not going to pull apart, right. It's just as enduring, or it's just as, I would say, sturdy as any acrylic paint.
Okay.
You could clean it with a rag with soap and water, actually.
Nice. Okay.
So all my mixed media work is done by first painting on paper, and then I have sheets. I'll spend a whole day painting paper, and I have tons of paper lying around. Then I can select the colors I want. But the difference between the newer things and the older things is I was painting on this 100% cotton, is actually rag marker paper, and using something called Steam-A-Seam, which was it's a fabric fuser that quilt makers use to fuse fabric before they applique.
Got it. Yeah.
And then they sew. Well, it also works with paper.
Cool.
So you heat set it. So you put it on the back of the paper, and you can peel the paper off, and you have let's stick with the shape of lips. You can cut it out of a full sheet that's been prepared with this backing, and then peel it off and lay it down onto the collage. It will adhere, but temporarily. So you can adhere it, put it on a wall, bring it down, and peel it off and move it somewhere else.
You're kidding me.
And when you get the whole collage completely assembled, then you take an iron and you melt this plastic.
Oh
no.
my God, I'm so glad I asked. That's a genius.
It's a very interesting. I actually made a video. If you ever want to try it, I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful way to work, and it is archival as far as we know.
Amazing.
Adhesives are always, the verdict is always out on adhesives.
Yeah.
It turns out that putting a man on the moon is a lot easier than gluing one thing to another.
As someone who has been working in collage for a long time, I agree with you.
Yeah. There's bubbles. There's all kinds of things that can go wrong.
Well, I have a question too about, so you're talking about prepping that paper, but I sort of assume these were on panels.
Well, let me go back. I'm going to finish answering.
Of course.
Okay, so I'm still talking about the paper.
Yeah.
So the problem with the Steam-A-Seam is you can't tear it.
Oh, interesting. And you said you used to use that, meaning?
I used to use it. I don't use it anymore because you can only cut. And all my edges were cut. And that was fine for that last body of work.
Interesting.
Which is on my website. These, because I wanted to tear, I realized I couldn't use that method. So what these are is paper that I can tear, which you can tear the marker paper, but it doesn't tear pulpily. I like the pulpiness of newsprint.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Now, there's a question of whether newsprint is archival. Well, it's a wood pulp paper. It's not a rag pulp. And it is not in itself archival. And all you have to do is look at a Kurt Schwitter's from 1921. You can see how it's yellowed terrifically, and even Rauschenberg from the 50s and 60s. It's very fugitive as such.
Just in color or in the...
physical integrity too.
Got it. Okay.
It breaks down. But if you glue it to a surface with acrylic and you paint on top of it with acrylic,
sealing it in.
You're sealing it.
Got it.
Then it's absolutely archival. So that's what I do. I paint on newspaper. And for these pieces, it's all newspaper. And sometimes the print will come through. I don't work for that. I can accept it sometimes. Other times I obliterate the print. The only thing I like about the print is it speaks to the factuality of the process.
Yeah.
So that's the paper. Now, what I'd start with is, these days I start with a cradled panel.
Okay.
The kind you get at Dick Blick.
Yeah.
They're just so reasonable. You can get like a 16 by 16 inch panel for about $24. And then I'll glue down a flat piece of paper, of colored paper as a start color. And then I just work on that. And I use matte medium.
As your glue?
Yeah.
Okay.
Matte medium.
Huh.
And I don't varnish the surface at the end.
I've noticed that. I mean, you could do a matte varnish, I suppose, but from my own explorations, I only do a finishing varnish when something's gone wrong and I need to bring everything together. And I really think that it's a collage, so it's flat, but it really tends to flatten the surface if you do that final touch to a collage.
The problem with matte medium any kind of varnish on acrylic especially, tends to lighten the darks. It's not crystal clear. It's hard to be crystal clear and also matte.
Yeah.
That seems to be impossible. I did varnish a couple of these. I was able, by watering the varnish down, I was able to put a varnish, but then I looked at it and think, what have I done? I basically put another layer of acrylic on it.
Yeah.
It's already got a layer of acrylic on it.
Yeah.
The only thing about it is that you can truthfully say you varnished it, and some people that are collectors, they're not convinced that sealing the acrylic makes it archival.
Yeah.
But at this point, I sort of feel like, well, those people just aren't going to buy one. That's life, you know?
Right.
Because I don't see any reason to do that.
Yeah.
They look great just the way they are, you know?
But it does bear saying that unlike the what is that, the steam stick method?
Steamosine.
Steamosine method, you do not get that same playful movement with this preparation. You can look at the piece of paper on the surface and say, that's about where I want to put it, but once you apply the glue, you set it down.
That's right.
It does not, there's no give with it. I've experimented with spray on, what is it called? Aerosol sprays before, and there is movement.
Spray adhesive.
Exactly. And I've also explored with working with sort of drenched or wet paper, which you can move around. Both of those, for me, have led to disaster as well. But you're okay with it. You're okay with not being able to nudge it and move.
Well, the only advantage of the Steamosine really is that you can put it on a wall.
Right.
I can nudge it infinitely when it's flat on a table. I just can't set it, you know.
Yeah.
I can't pick it up, but it's not really a disadvantage so much. You know, my pieces are small enough. If I was working like 4 by 5 feet, that would be a big disadvantage because I'd want to be able to see them at a distance.
Right.
You know, but at that scale, no, not a problem.
No, I understand. Interesting. But it has a lot to do with I was going to say the material component, but I'll tell you the truth is my least favorite part of collaging is adhesive. Like I love a free-floating image just on a table. And it's actually how I start a lot of my paintings is I'll make a collage and often I'll give it a little jiggle and then shapes will move and this will happen and I'll go, oh, that's better, you know?
Yeah.
So really I used to be a little embarrassed about it because I thought it showed the holes in my technique, but I do feel sometimes that I kill a collage by putting it together, by sticking it together.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, we actually pick up on that in the interview because there's something you said that the first thing you said was about I'm fixing on this thing I call chance and choice. My collages they relate to the paintings.
Okay.
I think they formally relate. And something you touched on earlier that I didn't really address was, even though I'm using abstract shapes, some of them are suggestive. I don't purposely make them that way. But I think the mind, because it's a meaning-making machine, you know, I think before there was a bison on a cave wall, there was a stain that looked like a bison, right? And I don't fight that. But although sometimes my wife will come in and she'll see a kitty cat in the painting, and then I either have to paint it out or turn the painting upside down because I can't stop seeing it. But in general, I do like to marshal that tendency on the viewer's part to try to make sense. That is an interesting part of the visual experience.
Yeah.
Well, I was getting to the point where the collages relate to the paintings, but they're never a study for the paintings.
Of course.
I can't take a collage and then make a painting that relates to it because my paintings absolutely have to start the way I talked earlier.
I wouldn't assume exactly that you have anything to go on.
I can't, and I actually tried that. When I was doing earlier collages, I thought, well, this is really a nice image. It'd be an interesting painting, and it just never would work. It would always be kind of dead in the water, you know, too predetermined.
Yeah, of
to offer a surprise of any kind. So that's what I wanted to say about that. Oh, and you were talking about when you make collages, you like to have things readily available.
Exactly.
And so you can, for me, it's just the opposite. I actually, I'm sort of deluged with painted paper and fragments and scraps, and even my tools are always under something.
Yeah.
But that slows the process down. And
which is good for you.
Which is good for me because I benefit from slowness.
Huh.
You know, the thing about slowness, it's just a little anecdote, but we had a student at the university that I taught at who came to us after having a terrible accident. She was a sweet young woman, came to us from Maryland, and she had an accident that she was paralyzed from pretty much the neck down. I mean, mostly paralyzed. And she was in a wheelchair. And she was in our program, and she always was accompanied by her service dog and by an aide. She's very smart, though, smart kid. And she took a painting class. And I came into the painting class after a couple of months of painting. I happened to be the chair of the department at that point, so I was going around looking at the classes. And her paintings, and I didn't even know they were hers. There was a group of paintings that just stood out. They were all painting from still life. It was very direct observation. But her paintings were so special, so different. And I figured out why it was. She was painting at about 1/3 the speed everyone else was painting at. She had to hold one hand up with the other hand and with great difficulty make the painting, which meant that she was painting slower than she was thinking. Everybody else in the class was painting faster than they were thinking.
Yeah. Wow.
And that's it in a nutshell. I think that the relationship between speed of thought and speed of hand, for me, I want to be painting slower than I'm thinking. Right?
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a great anecdote. It reminds me, the last conversation I had with an artist, he explained that when he sits down, that's when the critic starts talking. And he wants to, like, his ideal painting time is to get a whole painting done in one sitting so that when he moves away from the painting, then everyone can talk. And then he can become his own worst enemy. But I think it has to do with the dialogue or the monologue in your own head. So Absolutely. Yours is clearly more supportive and and curious. Maybe is the better word.
That makes total sense. I mean, I understand that. It was what we were talking about earlier. Is just kind of these sort of throw it out there and then deal with it.
Yeah.
And I do think people, we get inhibited for a lot of different reasons. There's other voices in the studio. Guston talked about that famous quote about they all leave.
Yep.
Fortunately, I have a great ability to compartmentalize. It's probably my greatest talent is the ability to shut everything out except the thing I'm concentrating on.
Nice. Yeah.
And so I don't really hear other voices when I'm working. It's actually more the opposite. When I sit back and I put on the critic's hat, then sometimes I'll contextualize my work in a way that I never do when I'm making it. But fortunately, at that point, I'm not near a brush.
Yeah.
So I can't really make the mistake of acting on it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about how you feel your paintings have changed over the years. You've been painting for a long time, so I don't want to make this a nebulous question. It could be within the last 5 years. And it feels like you've been painting improvisationally for a while. How have the paintings changed, either in final form or in the making of them, in the last handful of years? When was the last big change? And were any of those to do with challenges or obstacles that you wanted to smooth out?
Okay, well, I'm going to give you, I've been painting for 60 years, which is scary to even say, because you're actually at the place where you can see the darkness at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
when I was young, when I went through undergrad, the first couple years of undergrad, I was very observational. Like everything I did was from very realistic still life painting and tons of figure drawing. My conduit was really realism in the beginning. And my great hero was someone who was a neighbor of mine, Andrew Wyeth, because I grew up in Chadsford, Pennsylvania.
I just picked up a book of his letters back and forth with his dad. So it's a collection of letters, and so far it's
interesting.
great.
Yeah. Well, anyway, that's a huge influence on me. And then in the middle of my undergraduate period, I discovered abstraction.
Okay.
I'll make this really brief, but I had a kind of a seismic experience. I went to, the class took a trip to New York, and we went to a show at the Met that was put on by Henry Getzalder. It was a survey of contemporary American painting. It included everything. It included abstract expressionism, post-painterly abstraction, pop art, minimalism, everything that was going on probably from 1950 to 1970 was represented there. And I was really coming from a very provincial place growing up in southeastern Pennsylvania and in a working class family. I was the first person in my family that went to college, actually. So it just blew my socks off. And it's particularly the post-painterly abstractionist and painters like Frankenthaler and Morris Louis, particularly. Sure. When I went back to school, my junior year, I started making large-scale color field paintings. So I embraced abstraction at that point. And from that point on, I never worked from observation. Even though later I got back to pictorial painting to a degree, it was always out of my head.
Got it.
So now we're going to jump forward to the 21st century. And around 2000, I'd say 1998 to 2004, I devoted myself to small, what I called metaphysical paintings that were, I would say, the language of realism, but they were out of my head. Okay. I guess the closest thing, they look nothing like De Chirico, but I think, or Carlos Cara, painters like that, but I think fundamentally they were the same idea, making up conceived realities to kind of get to something like the meaning behind appearances, sort of. And I did that up until around 2004, and then I just felt like I'd worked my way into a dead end.
Yeah.
So I sort of related to what you were talking about earlier.
Sure.
And I decided to look at how I was painting, and I felt like it had just gotten too fictional, actually, to use the term. It was completely fictional.
Compared to factual, how you,
where I'm working now.
Right.
I was doing paintings that had what used to be called the licked surface, the early 19th century French academicism. So the surface was very flat, and the illusions were very convincing. And it was a window to a world.
Yeah.
I just suddenly rejected all that and went back to my more abstract roots and decided to make factual paintings. But they weren't abstract at first. They were still imagistic. And they were acrylic gouache on panels and paper and canvas, but it was all acrylic.
Which you hadn't worked in before, or all those years we bypassed? Was there a lot of acrylic painting?
No, mostly oil painting
mostly
up to that
oil.
point. Although I had done acrylic when I was much younger.
Okay.
So these paintings, the rule I made was I could never paint a shadow, I could never illustrate a light source, I could never show a volume through modeling. Anything else I could do. I decided if I jettisoned those things, it was going to force me to achieve a higher level of invention to compensate for the lack of those illusionistic devices.
Hell yeah.
Right? So it started out with I've called the syntax of a landscape, or some of them had figural elements in them, but otherwise kind of abstract, flat. And then over the years, from 2005 or 6 up until 2017 or 18, it got more and more abstract. At one point, it was like a cogent image with abstract elements flying around
Okay.
to an abstract image with pictorial elements flying around, right?
Cool. Uh-huh.
And then around 2018, 19, I had this little sidebar, which was the first experience of collage.
Really, that's a newer, because I think on your website it only goes back to maybe 2020. So I assumed collage goes back much further. But
well,
it's
if you
newer.
go on my website, there's something called cyanotype collages.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about those. I'd never heard of that before.
Well, cyanotype.
Not to get you off track here, but
Well, cyanotypes are basically blueprints, and a lot of people, most famously, there was a woman whose name I can't quite remember. She was working around 1837. She was the friend of the guy who invented blueprints.
okay.
I wish I could remember her name, but she did some very famous portfolios of cyanotypes of ferns and grasses, and they're just exquisite, and they incredibly archival, actually, cyanotypes. And many artists in the 20th century, most famously the surrealists like Man Ray worked with that.
Okay.
They played with cyanotype as a technique. I was teaching a collage class at Anderson Ranch in around 2015. And so I had done collage before that. Obviously, I wouldn't be teaching collage if I hadn't done collage, but it wasn't a major part of my practice. It was like a sidebar. Someone was teaching cyanotypes, the traditional kind of sunprint method, where you put a key down and the sun creates the silhouette on the. It's a primitive photo process, and I had this idea of cutting out paper dolls and making cyanotypes that way. So it would be like Lonnie Reinecker, you know who she was? Lonnie Reinecker was an amazing animator who did cut paper animations in Germany in the late teens and up until the Nazis took over and she left the country. But the work I was making was sort of coming out of that tradition. And I started making these pictorial cyanotypes, and you might want to insert an image here.
Yeah, I can do that.
From my website, you can do a screenshot, where they're collages made out of cyanotypes. So the cyanotypes would be made with flat images, and then I would cut those up and configure them into a collage. So they would effectively be cyanotype collages. But what's fascinating about that process was it was collage from the get-go, because I was cutting out flat paper elements, abstract shapes and pictorial elements, and then exposing them on photosensitized paper. That was a collage format, and then I was cutting those up and reconfiguring them into new collages, right? So it was a beautiful process, and I did many of those and exhibited them, and I stopped making them around 2019. I just kind of exhausted it.
Yeah.
You know, but the remnant of that was moving more toward abstraction in the painting, having fewer and fewer pictorial elements in the painting and more abstract elements, till around 2021 it started to flip over and become completely abstract. So total abstraction in my work really is fairly recent. It's since 2021, this is 2025, 4 years of paintings like this, which I consider pretty much completely abstract.
I'm really glad we got to that point in the conversation, because I think your paintings make a lot more sense to me now. Because as someone, I sort of saw you as someone who had been just an abstract painter. And I know one could argue that as a formalist, every painting starts as an abstract painting, but that's not what I'm talking about. I mean that there's so much of that imagined fiction, to borrow your word, in these paintings, which is actually what drew me to them. Often I have a hard time reading or computing pure abstraction. So looking at your work, of course it's abstract, but there's so much that I take from, the irregularity of a shape half remembered, and then you put it out there. So this just clarifies for me a lot of the mark making and a lot of the objects and detritus I see in your painting.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, they're like I see them. I mean, I think they're imaginative, but they're factual.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, I get that, and I like the balance between those two, or maybe the contention between those two. But I want to. We're running a little low on time. If you're up for it, I'd like you to speak about an artist who has influenced you over the years. And I really liked you talking about Matisse. So if you want to pick him, that's fine. Because I love the idea that some artists we discover early and then they stay with us. And you're always finding new things to the point that it doesn't even have to be an influence on your work, but an artist that is very spiritually close to you. And it also could be, I have a story about Bonnard being someone that I could not, for the life of me, figure out until I turned 30.
Yeah.
And now I make a beeline for every Bonnard painting I can. So I also like
Good
that.
idea.
Yeah. But anything you have to share would be appreciated.
Well, actually, there's a guy. I also have a real deep interest in art history, actually. And it started when I was in high school. I got a book called The Concise History of Western Painting, I think it's called. And I lived in that book. I mean, I still have it. It's like rag,
Cool.
But I've always been just thrilled by looking at paintings from all eras, all periods. And I grew up near the Philadelphia Museum, and as soon as I got my driver's license, I used to drive up there, and I'd hook school and go up and just look at the paintings. So, Giotto, all that stuff is hugely important. Russian icons, and also the Dutch masters, all that stuff is in the can. But to answer your question very directly, I can go to one painter. Well, there's really two, but this one really is, I would say, soul meat for me. Albert Pinkham Ryder.
Tell me why. Tell me about him.
Because, another thing I really love is outsider art. But I've loved it before everyone else loved it. I've always been in the art of children. And the other artist I was going to name was Paul Klee. Okay. And hugely influential on my thinking. And the Blau Ryder and that whole group and their relationship to primitivism and all that stuff, which really is an extension of Rousseau's philosophy, which I don't subscribe to literally. It's more like a romantic idea that I like to please myself with. Sure. But getting back to Ryder, Ryder to me, it's the purest kind of painting. It's first of all, it's extremely, it's formalistically so satisfying. His shape making, his use of light and shadow, most famously he did these Midnight Marine paintings, and all his stuff is so just suffused with feeling. They're like holy paintings, really. They do.
But you're not even a Buddhist.
I'm not even a Buddhist. I don't think I believe in God. I mean, I think I would say I was an agnostic just to cover my ass. But I want desperately to believe in God. I'm not proud or pleased with it, but the condition as it exists just seems to lack sufficient evidence. Where there's plenty of evidence for the devil, ironically. But anyway, we're getting off topic here. Ryder, his relationship to nature, his relationship to painting, his relationship to being, was such a. There's one of my favorite stories about Ryder is he sold a painting to a guy, but he wouldn't let him have it for about 10 years because he kept working on them. His studio was just littered with junk. He actually had paths that went to his hot plate, went to his toilet, went to his bed, went to a few paintings. After 10 years, the guy finally corners him on the street and makes him promise to give him the painting. So he says, well, come to my studio next Wednesday. So the man comes to his studio and he says, oh, okay. He says, I'll get the painting. He goes over to the painting and he looks at it in the light and he sees it has some dust on it, and then he like runs a faucet over it, cleans it off with a rag, then turns it back into the light and stares at it for about 30 seconds and turns to the guy and he goes, "Not today." You know, Martin Hartley did a great portrait of Ryder.
Oh, really?
He was a patron saint of early American modernists. So anyway, that's my answer. Yeah, Ryder. Go look at Ryder.
But what about, besides good anecdotes and the mythological of it all, what about him and Clay keep your interest? And would you say it's a direct influence on your work, or are they more people that just kind of fill you up with richness when you see them? Because again, both. Okay.
Clay, Ryder, the paintings are just powerful. I mean, they're formal, they're very simplified renderings. And they just, as pure design, if you just did a drawing of a Ryder, you'd have just his shape making, his color, the richness of it. But Clay more so. Clay wrote a book called The Pedagogical Sketchbook, in which he talks about visual forces and how they work, which really, later on, there's a visual, I guess you would say, a theorist called Rudolf Arnheim. I don't know if you heard of him, or Gombrich. Gombrich and Arnheim are two major visual theorists, if you want to talk about form in painting. Okay. And they really grow out of the Bauhaus, and they grow out of Paul Klay's pedagogical sketchbook to some degree, talking about how we transfer our experience, our kinetic experience of the world onto the two dimensions of a canvas. How our feelings of anxiety, pleasure, joy, all those things that we draw from our relationship to objects as we move through space are the exact same things we rely on when we organize shapes on two-dimensional surface.
Interesting.
Right?
Okay.
So Paul Clay is exemplar of that. His work is always formally surprising. It's always singular. Each painting is its own little world. It's always inventive. And then finally, the other thing that I relate to in Paul Clay is his temperament. There was a time in my life when I wanted to be like Francis Bacon. I wanted to be dark and important, and talk about the misery and suffering of existence and all those things. But I'm not that person. I'm really, to my, I guess, everlasting discredit, a kind of cheerful person. I'm a joyful person, and I love life, and I understand how bad it is, and I really am, I'm fundamentally, I understand the problems of late capitalism and the misery that's in the world and the unjust suffering that people undergo. But my personal experience, it's not been an unalloyed pleasure, a waltz through life. I have my tale of woe, as we all do. But when it comes to making paintings, pictures, I'm more like Paul Clay or Richard Diebenkorn. I'm a lyricist.
Yeah.
And that's part of, that has to be in my work. Keeping it out is dishonest.
Well, that was a question you asked me before we got on mic, talking about my older work, and you asked if it sort of rhymed with my temperament. Was my temperament in line with the paintings I was making? And I used to think that searching for joy was what you're doing in painting, but joy is, if you're not a joyful person, then you're not going to make joyful paintings. I like specifying the temperament should match, and I do believe, I agree with you. I think it should. I think that's where you find whatever your fact or fiction or the content of your work, I think it ought to match your temperament at the end of the day.
Well, I think that's how you know you're making the real work.
Yeah. That's a good point.
This is a good time for me to do the last part. If you wanted to do the...
It is. So this is the part where you give the unbridled wisdom to
the wisdom of the ages.
Exactly.
Well, one thing is, we know nothing. Let's start with that, all right?
Okay.
There's no... when I was younger, it was so clear to me what was good, what was bad, what's the right way to do things, what's the wrong way to do things. Now I feel sympathy for any painter, because any painter who's working earnestly and honestly, those are the people I have sympathy for. And even if there's work that I don't respond to, I understand the struggle, and I can actually appreciate the excellence. There's excellent work that I don't care for.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's an important thing to understand if you're a young artist, is that there are things that you don't relate to that don't necessarily suck, to use a more juvenile term. I think that's an important lesson to learn. Then the other thing that I've learned over the years is that if you tap into who you are, honestly and earnestly in the studio, that you'll be making work that's interesting to people. Because that honesty is communicated.
Yeah.
People are interested in honesty. They relate to it.
They can see it.
They can see it. And that's one of the beautiful things about painting, is that it's such a precise tool of registration. It doesn't just register touch, but through touch, it registers intangibles, ineffables, metaphysics. I think I wanted to do metaphysical painting when I was younger, a la De Chirico or Morandi. But then I ultimately realized that metaphysics comes through authenticity. The reason painting is interesting is because it's more than just what it looks like. It communicates micro-attitude in an incredibly sensitive way to the sensitive viewer. Someone asked me what painting was for once, kind of a skeptical person, like, well, it was during that period when painting was dead and everybody thought painting was stupid. And they said, well, what's painting even for? And I said, painting is spiritual nourishment for the visually sensitive.
I love it.
In a nutshell, that's the way I feel about it. And I'm not using the word spiritual like Madame Blavatsky or something, theosophy or anything like that, but the spirit, your innards, the way you feel. I do think there's suffering in the world, and I think it's important for people to show that in painting. I think there's a place for political painting and for message art and didactic, but I don't think that sensitive, abstract art is also meaningless. I think the soul needs all that, needs it all.
David, this has been so much fun, and I think that's a great place for us to leave it, but thanks for the conversation. Thanks for, sharing.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure.